The Grand Assembly Hall of Velcara Prime was loud that morning. It was always loud. That was the nature of a civilization made of hundreds of species, thousands of cultures, and more opinions than the galaxy had stars. Conversations layered over each other in waves of different languages, different voices, different anatomies trying to communicate across the same air. Clicking mandibles. Deep rumbling throat tones. Soft ultrasonic chirps translated through ceiling projectors. The translation grid built into the chamber's high-vaulted dome hummed constantly as it struggled to convert every sentence into something the others could understand. At the center of the room, the Galactic Conclave Senate argued about territory. Delegate Sereth of the Keth sat in his elevated chair near the outer ring of the chamber and listened with the quiet patience of someone who had spent far too many years doing exactly this. Sereth was old. Very old by Keth standards. His scales had once been a sharp emerald color, but time had faded them to a dull gray-green. The ridges above his eyes had softened with age, and the heavy cloak draped across his shoulders carried the ceremonial marks of 60 years of Senate service. 60 years. 60 years of debates. 60 years of territorial disputes, trade negotiations, and arguments over resources on planets that sometimes barely deserve to be called planets. He had seen empires rise during those years. He had seen others collapse. He had listened to speeches about unity delivered by species who would happily undermine each other 5 minutes later in private negotiations. And this morning was no different. A Dravathi delegate stood in the center of the speaking platform, his tall armored frame rigid with irritation as he addressed the chamber. The Viron corridor is a critical trade artery for our frontier systems, he declared, the translator grid carrying his words across the room in dozens of languages. Granting exclusive navigation rights to the Kalari coalition would endanger the stability of the entire region. A Kalari representative immediately rose from the opposite side. The corridor has never belonged to the Dravathi, she replied sharply. Your fleets merely patrol it. Patrol does not equal ownership. Voices rose. Other delegates joined. Within seconds the chamber had dissolved into overlapping arguments. Sereth closed one eye slowly. The Viron corridor. He remembered when that particular argument had first appeared. 42 years ago. Neither side had changed its position since. More importantly, neither side actually lived anywhere near the corridor they were fighting over. That detail did not seem to bother anyone. Sereth leaned slightly back in his chair, resting his claws against the polished stone armrests. His long tail coiled comfortably beneath the seat. He allowed the noise to wash over him. This was the conclave. Debate was its lifeblood. But beneath the noise, beneath the politics and the posturing, the galaxy itself had been quiet for a very long time. Too quiet. 30,000 years had passed since the last existential war. 30,000 years since the event that older species still spoke about in careful tones. The war against the Unraveling. The war that had nearly ended everything. Most of the younger civilizations in the conclave treated the story as ancient history. A distant myth. Something that belonged to a different age. Sereth knew better. He had studied the archives. He had read the military records. The Unraveling had not been defeated. It had been stopped. And there was a difference. Still, 30,000 years was a long time. Long enough for civilizations to forget. Long enough for fear to fade into complacency. Long enough for a galaxy to convince itself that danger belonged to the past. The debate below him grew louder. The Dravathi delegate slammed his armored fist against the podium. This corridor has strategic value for border security. The chamber lights suddenly changed color. The golden illumination that normally filled the Senate Hall dimmed instantly. In its place, a deep crimson glow spread across the walls. Every conversation stopped. Every delegate turned toward the center of the chamber. The translation grid fell silent. Sereth's second eye opened. He had seen that color before. Only once. 50 years ago. The Senate alert system activated automatically when something occurred that required the immediate attention of every governing authority in the conclave. The voice that followed came from the Central Monitoring Network, an automated system that controlled deep-range sensor arrays across thousands of star systems. The system did not speak often. When it did, the galaxy listened. Priority 0 signal received. The words echoed across the silent chamber. Deep-range sensor array. Galactic rim. Sector 9. Sareth felt the scales along the back of his neck tighten. Priority 0. In 60 years of Senate service, he had never heard those words spoken in this room. Around him, hundreds of alien delegates sat frozen in their seats. Even the Dravathi and Kalari representatives had stopped arguing. The system continued in the same calm mechanical tone. Unknown object detected. A faint ripple of whispers moved through the chamber. Sareth leaned forward slowly. The voice finished its report. Object classification unresolvable. A pause followed. 3 seconds of perfect silence. Then the final line. All Senate proceedings are suspended pending emergency review. For the first time in decades, the Grand Assembly Hall of Velcara Prime was completely quiet. Sareth looked up at the crimson-lit ceiling. Somewhere at the far edge of the galaxy, something had appeared. And for reasons no one yet understood, the galaxy's oldest warning systems had just woken up. 3 levels below the Senate Hall, the noise of the chamber above had already faded into a distant vibration through the stone structure of Velcara Prime. Down here, the Conclave sensor analysis wing was quiet. It had to be. Every room in the complex was lined with soft-lit consoles and layered holographic displays that floated in the air like translucent windows into the void. Data streamed constantly across them. Sensor sweeps, navigational charts, energy signatures, gravitational readings collected from thousands of monitoring stations across the galaxy. Most of it was routine. Navigation hazards. Minor stellar fluctuations. The occasional pirate fleet crossing a trade corridor. Nothing that required the attention of the Senate. But today was different. Science Officer Muria Alm stood in front of the central analysis display, glowing faintly blue. Her species, called the Almari, had bioluminescent skin that shifted color depending on emotional state. Calm produced a steady pale blue. Curiosity brightened it. Fear turned it sharp and bright. Right now Muria was glowing like a star. She stared at the sensor data hovering in front of her. Then she read it again. Then a third time. The numbers did not make sense. "Run the scan again," she said quietly. One of the technicians across the room nodded and triggered another sweep from the deep-range array positioned along the galactic rim. The holographic image in front of Muria refreshed. The object remained exactly where it had been. Exactly the same. A dark shape drifting through empty space. The first sensor pass had marked it as an asteroid. That had lasted 12 seconds. The second pass had noticed the symmetry. The third pass had noticed the edges. Natural rock did not have edges. Natural rock did not measure exactly 3 kilometers in length with structural lines running the entire length of its hull. Muria's glow brightened again. "Mass reading?" she asked. "Consistent with a large constructed vessel," the technician replied. "Engine output?" "None." "Thermal emissions?" "None." "Radiation signature?" "None." Muria leaned closer to the display. The object was moving. Slowly but steadily. A straight trajectory heading inward from the galactic rim toward populated space. "How long has it been drifting?" she asked. The system processed the trajectory projection. "Estimated drift time," the console responded. 29,800 years. The room went silent. Muria's glow shifted slightly toward white. "Repeat that." Trajectory analysis indicates the object was likely accelerated by an external force approximately 30,000 years ago and has been traveling at constant sublight velocity since that time. 30,000 years. Muria stared at the shape rotating slowly in the holographic display. It was dark. Not black like empty space, but a dull metallic gray that reflected almost nothing. Scars covered its surface. Micrometeor impacts. Radiation erosion. Long grooves carved into the plating by centuries of particle streams drifting through interstellar dust. The damage was ancient. But beneath the damage, the structure was unmistakable. It had been built. Deliberately. Material composition, Muria said. Another scan ran. The analysis results appeared. Surface alloys detected, the system reported. Composition unknown. Unknown. That word appeared in the Conclave database less often than people thought. Between the hundreds of species in the Galactic Conclave, the archives contained material samples and engineering records stretching back 40,000 years. But the alloys on the object drifting through Sector 9 matched none of them. Not even close. One of Muria's assistants spoke quietly. Could it be a ship from an undiscovered civilization? Muria didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the display. Because something about the shape bothered her. Ships built by modern conclave species tended to follow similar design philosophies. External engines. Shield generators mounted along the spine. Weapon arrays attached to visible hardpoints. This vessel had none of those things. Instead, the entire hull looked like a single continuous armored structure. Layered. Reinforced. As if the ship had been designed to survive catastrophic damage. As if someone had expected it to be shot at. A lot. Enhance the bow section, Muria said. The image zoomed in. At first the surface looked like more of the same, scarred metal plates worn smooth by time. Then the analysis grid highlighted something. Lines. Carved lines. Not scratches. Not damage. Writing. Muria leaned closer. The letters were large. Deeply engraved into the hull itself, not painted or etched. Whoever had placed them there had wanted them to survive thousands of years of exposure to open space. Even through the erosion, the shapes were still visible. The translation system began analyzing them. The characters did not match any known conclave language. But the system kept searching. Running pattern recognition against older linguistic databases. Against extinct species archives. Against ancient military records. The room waited. Then the translation display flickered. A partial match appeared. Muria felt a strange chill move through her chest as the words resolved. Because the translation was not unfamiliar. It was old. Very old. A language that appeared only rarely in the deepest historical records of the Conclave. A language belonging to a species that had vanished so long ago most civilizations barely remembered it had existed. The translation finished. The words appeared clearly across the holographic display. Muria read them slowly. HFY Prometheus. Earth Defense Fleet. She stared at the text. The name triggered something in her memory. A half-forgotten reference buried deep in the archive records she had studied years ago. Humanity. Behind her, one of the technicians whispered. Is that? Muria nodded slowly. Yes. Her glow had turned almost white now. She looked back at the ancient vessel drifting silently across the sensor grid. A ship that had been traveling for 30,000 years. A ship built by a species that the galaxy believed had disappeared forever. She inhaled slowly. Prepare an intercept vessel. The technician looked up. You're going out there? Muria's eyes never left the display. Yes. Another line of data appeared suddenly on the screen. The object's internal heat signature had changed. Barely. A fraction of a degree. But enough for the sensors to detect. Muria's glow flickered. Inside the drifting warship, something had just activated. Very faint. Very small. But unmistakable. After 30,000 years of silence, the ancient human ship had begun to wake up. The interceptor vessel Luminous Path left Velcara Prime less than an hour later. It was not a warship. Not really. Like most conclave science vessels, it had been built for scanning, cataloging, and surviving long-range research missions in unstable regions of space. Its hull was sleek and pale silver, its engine glow-soft and controlled, its shields respectable but not designed for frontline combat. Still, the Conclave had attached an escort. 3 military ships traveled with Muria's vessel in a staggered defensive formation as they pushed toward the galactic rim. No one had said the word aloud. But everyone understood the same thing. If the drifting vessel out there truly was human, no one knew what waking it might mean. Muria stood in the observation alcove just off the bridge, one hand resting against the cool edge of a data console, and watched the stars stretch into thin lines as the ship entered long-range transit. Her skin still held that unsettled pale white glow of intense concentration. Behind her, The bridge remained quiet. The crew spoke in low voices, as if volume alone might somehow disturb whatever waited ahead of them in deep space. Miria turned from the stars and moved toward the ship's archive terminal. Whenever she encountered something she did not understand, she had one instinct before all others. She researched. The Conclave's historical archive network was vast beyond easy description. 40,000 years of treaties, census reports, war logs, trade charts, diplomatic incidents, archaeological surveys, extinction records, religious cross-indexes, and military after-action reports gathered from hundreds of civilizations. Most of it was dry. A galaxy's memory was mostly paperwork. But hidden inside that ocean of paperwork were older currents. Buried things. Forgotten things. Miria keyed in the first search term. Humanity. The results appeared slowly. Not because there were many, but because there were so few. That in itself was wrong. A species capable of building a 3-kilometer warship should have left behind entire mountain ranges of records. Colonial maps. Fleet rosters. Trade treaties. Embassy transcripts. Engineering patents. Instead, what appeared on the archive terminal looked like the shattered remnants of a burned library. Broken military files. Corrupted historical fragments. Scattered references inside documents written by other species. Entire centuries reduced to damaged lines of text and incomplete translations. Miria sat down. The ship hummed softly around her as it traveled through the dark. She opened the oldest intact record first. It was a tactical report written by a Keth military observer during the early years of a war called the Unraveling conflict. Most of the file had degraded beyond recovery. But one section remained legible. Human combat behavior remains strategically irrational by conventional standards. When presented with deteriorating conditions, most species preserve force cohesion through structured retreat. Humans do not. Under severe pressure, they demonstrate increased aggression, accelerated adaptation, and an alarming willingness to convert probable death into tactical leverage. Miria read the paragraph twice. Then she opened the next file. This one was Dravathi, a battlefield account. The Dravathi were one of the oldest surviving martial species in the Conclave, large and naturally armored, proud of their warrior traditions. Their records usually described allies with respect only when that respect had been earned in blood. This one did not sound respectful. It sounded unsettled. They are physically unimpressive at first assessment. Soft-skinned. Structurally fragile. No natural armor, no venom, no claws of note. This evaluation becomes irrelevant the moment combat begins. Miria's glow deepened slightly. She kept reading. Humans do not fight according to the injury logic observed in most species. Wounds that should reduce morale often intensify it. Encirclement does not reliably produce surrender. Loss of command structure does not reliably produce collapse. Their tactical behavior becomes more dangerous as options decrease. Another file. Then another. A naval summary from an extinct border species. A damaged intelligence note. Fragments from a Senate emergency briefing tens of thousands of years old. Every intact reference to humanity used different words. But all of those words bent toward the same shape. Relentless. Adaptive. Unpredictable. Dangerous. Not because humans were the strongest species. Not because they were the fastest, or the most armored, or the most naturally deadly. Because they thought differently. Miria found a surviving audio transcript from a cross-species military conference held near the end of the Unraveling conflict. The sound quality was poor, full of static and age scars, but the translated text remained. One speaker, identified only as a senior Keth war strategist, said, "A human force in retreat is not necessarily weakened. A human force under pressure is not necessarily failing. If they appear cornered, assume you are the one being maneuvered." Miria sat very still after reading that. The ship traveled onward. Stars shifted slowly beyond the hull. She opened another file. This one was not military. It was a psychological summary prepared for diplomats assigned to human-controlled sectors. A dry administrative document. But even this was strange. Humans exhibit contradictory baseline behaviors. They are cooperative in ways that suggest pack-bonding instinct, but also highly individualistic in method. They are emotionally expressive, but capable of extreme compartmentalization during crisis conditions. They form attachments quickly and defend those attachments with disproportionate force. Another line near the bottom caught her attention. Threat response escalates significantly when humans believe non-combatants, dependents, or allied populations are at risk. In such cases, deterrence logic becomes unreliable. Muria leaned back slowly. A pattern was forming now. The archives were not describing a race of monsters. That was the unsettling part. They were describing a species that by most biological standards should not have dominated any military age they entered. Soft-bodied. Short-lived. No natural weapons worth noting. Late to space compared to older civilizations. And yet the old records spoke of them with the particular tone institutions used only for one kind of force. A force that had repeatedly survived where logic said it should not. Muria opened the oldest surviving summary of all. It was badly damaged, with entire segments missing, but enough remained to reconstruct the outline. 30,000 years ago, the galaxy had faced something it could not truly fight. The Unraveling. The files disagreed on what it was. Some described it as a dimensional incursion. Others as a predatory collapse phenomenon. Others as a failure in the structure of coherent space itself. But all surviving records agreed on the effect. Where the unraveling spread, reality ceased to function normally. Ships, stations, planets, gone. Not destroyed in the ordinary sense. Amate. The old Conclave fleets had tried to hold the line. They had lost system after system. Then humanity had proposed another strategy. Not defend. Pursue. Not contain. Follow it back. Muria found a fragment from an emergency wartime declaration, likely of human origin, though half the identifiers were corrupted. If the incursion cannot be stopped from this side, then this side is no longer where the war is fought. Her glow dimmed to a thoughtful blue-white. She read every surviving line connected to the final human campaign. The picture that emerged was incomplete but unmistakable. At the height of the war, the human fleets had entered the rupture point through which the unraveling had been spreading. Every major human fleet. Every recorded colony signal. Every defense command. They had gone into the dark to collapse the breach from the inside. And then, nothing. Every human signal ceased. All at once. No gradual collapse. No scattered survivors. No long retreat. Just silence. The galaxy had looked for answers for a while. For centuries, according to some files. Then other emergencies had risen. New empires had formed. Borders changed. Records decayed. And humanity, the species that had apparently walked into annihilation to buy the rest of the galaxy time, had faded from history. Legend. The myth. Then dust in damaged archives no one bothered to read. Muria stared at the terminal. For a long moment she did not move. Then she found one final file. A short Keth combat note, preserved by chance more than design. Just one paragraph. No title. No signature. Only this. Do not engage a human force that has accepted death. At that point they are no longer preserving life. They are purchasing victory, and they will decide the price for both sides. Muria read the words in silence. Then she slowly turned her gaze back toward the observation viewport. Somewhere ahead, drifting through deep space, was a 3-kilometer human warship that had gone silent 30,000 years ago. A ship from the final days of the war that had erased humanity from the known galaxy. A ship that had just begun to wake up. And if the old records were even half true, the Conclave had not discovered a relic. It had discovered a survivor. The luminous path reached the object 4 days later. Long before the ship arrived within visual range, the sensors began reporting its presence. The numbers appeared first. Mass readings. Hull density scans. Gravitational distortion signatures from the sheer size of the structure drifting through open space. But numbers were one thing. Seeing it was another. Muria stood at the forward observation deck as the stars slowly stopped stretching and returned to steady points of light. The interceptor vessel eased out of long-range transit and into normal space. For several seconds the viewport showed nothing but darkness. Then the escort vessel Triarch Spear moved slightly to the side of the formation. And the object appeared. Muria did not speak. No one on the bridge did. The ship was enormous. Not just large in the way Conclave capital ships were large, sleek vessels with extended engine pylons and visible weapon platforms. This was something different. The structure was nearly 3 kilometers long, a dark slab of armored metal drifting through the void with a stillness that felt unnatural. The hull was scarred with the passage of ages. Micrometeor strikes had pitted the surface. Radiation storms had burned faint discolorations across the armor. Entire sections bore long gouges where something violent had once struck the plating. But the structure beneath the damage remained unmistakable. Deliberate, layered, powerful. The vessel looked less like a ship and more like a fortress that had learned how to fly. One of Muria's technicians spoke quietly behind her. "It's intact." She nodded slowly. The sensors confirmed it. Despite 30,000 years drifting through deep space, the warship's hull integrity remained almost perfect. The armor plating was thicker than anything used by modern Conclave fleets. Multiple reinforcement layers were visible beneath the outer surface. And the weapon systems? Even half buried beneath centuries of erosion, they were unmistakable. Massive cannon ports built directly into the hull. Missile silos hidden behind armored shutters. Closed defense turrets recessed into the plating like the eyes of some ancient predator. This ship had not been built to patrol. It had been built to survive a war. The Triarch Spear transmitted a cautious sensor sweep toward the vessel. No shields activated. No weapons powered. No signals returned. Just silence. Muria moved closer to the viewport. Now that they were near, details emerged. The hull plating was darker than it had appeared on long-range scans, almost charcoal in color. Across the bow, the ancient carving was visible. Large letters cut deep into the armor. Time had worn the edges smooth, but the shapes remained readable. The translation grid activated automatically. HFY Prometheus. Earth Defense Fleet. Below the name, another line stretched across the bow in multiple scripts. Dozens of languages. Different alphabets. Different symbol systems. Someone had taken the time to translate the same message again and again, ensuring that almost any intelligent species that encountered the vessel could read it. The translation finished. Muria felt a strange tightening in her chest as the words appeared. "We will return." Behind her, one of the crew members whispered softly. 30,000 years. Muria kept staring at the words. There was something haunting about them. They did not read like a threat. They did not read like a boast. They read like a promise. Her eyes moved slowly along the massive hull. The Prometheus drifted through the dark with the quiet patience of something that had been waiting longer than most civilizations had existed. "Commander," the sensor officer said carefully. "There's something else." Muria turned. The main sensor display had changed. A faint thermal spike glowed inside the ship's internal structure. Very faint. Barely measurable. But growing. The reactor core, long cold, was warming. Another reading appeared. Electrical activity. Not large. Not sudden. But deliberate. The Prometheus was powering up. Muria's glow brightened again. "Maintain distance," she said quietly. The escort vessels shifted slightly outward, forming a cautious perimeter around the drifting giant. The luminous path held position 2 kilometers from the hull. The ancient warship continued to drift. For a moment nothing else happened. The stars remained still. The Prometheus remained silent. Then a small section of the hull changed. Near the forward quarter of the ship, a rectangular port, sealed and dark for 30,000 years, suddenly illuminated. A single amber light appeared behind the glass. The glow was soft, steady, and impossibly small compared to the massive structure surrounding it. But the effect was unmistakable. It looked like an eye opening in the darkness. The bridge crew froze. Muria leaned forward slightly. Inside the ancient warship, something had awakened. The sensor officer spoke again, voice tight. "Power readings increasing." Another flicker appeared. Then another. Deep inside the Prometheus, Systems began activating in sequence. One reactor node, then another. Internal power relays hummed to life like the slow heartbeat of a giant that had been asleep for millennia. The ancient ship was waking up. Muria stepped closer to the communication console. "Transmit greeting sequence," she said. The signal officer nodded and initiated the broadcast. Standard conclave contact protocols flowed outward across every known communication frequency. Mathematical constants. Universal prime sequences. Basic greeting structures used by dozens of species. Nothing returned. The Prometheus continued powering up slowly. Minutes passed. Then the sensor grid registered something new. A signal. Not directed outward yet, but forming. Encoded. Buried inside a narrow frequency band that no modern conclave vessel normally used. The ship's AI began decoding automatically. The signal strengthened. Then suddenly, the bridge speakers activated. A voice filled the room. Human. Authentication protocol active. Every person on the bridge went perfectly still. The voice continued, identifying external vessel communication standards. The tone was steady, controlled, not confused, not frightened. It sounded like someone who had expected this moment eventually. Unknown civilization detected. A short pause followed. Then the voice spoke again. "Stand by." The transmission ended. Silence returned to the bridge. Muria stared at the console. She had just heard the first human voice spoken in the galaxy for 30,000 years. One of her officers whispered softly, Did that just happen?" Muria did not answer, because at that exact moment, a new signal appeared on her console. Not a broadcast. A direct transmission. Targeted precisely at the luminous path. The console beeped quietly. Then the speakers activated again. A different voice spoke this time. Still human. Still calm. But older somehow. More deliberate. "This is Oracle Operational Intelligence of the United Earth Star vessel Prometheus." A brief pause. "I am aware that significant time has passed." The voice carried a strange weight of patience. "As a courtesy, I will ask only once." Another pause. "Unknown vessel, please confirm." The bridge lights reflected softly in Muria's wide eyes as she leaned toward the console. "Confirm what?" she asked quietly. The answer came immediately. That the galaxy still exists. For a moment, no one on the luminous path spoke. The question from the ancient warship hung in the air like something fragile. "Confirm that the galaxy still exists." Muria slowly exhaled. Her glow settled into a focused blue again as training took over. She pressed the response key on the console. "This is Science Officer Muria Alm of the Galactic Conclave Research Vessel Luminous Path," she said carefully. "We are receiving your signal." She paused, choosing her next words with precision. "Yes. The galaxy still exists." There was a short silence. Then the human voice returned. "Thank you." Another pause followed, longer this time, as if the intelligence controlling the ancient vessel was processing the implications of that statement. When the voice spoke again, its tone remained calm. "I am Oracle, Operational Intelligence of the UASV Prometheus. I have completed preliminary identification of your vessel class and communication architecture." Muria's fingers tightened slightly against the console. Oracle continued. "I estimate that approximately 30,000 years have passed since my last confirmed external contact." Her bridge crew exchanged quiet looks. Oracle's voice carried no surprise. Only confirmation. "As expected," the AI added. Muria blinked. "As expected?" she repeated. "Yes." A faint humming vibration passed through the hull of the Prometheus as more systems activated. Preservation protocols were designed for extended dormancy, Oracle explained. Full system restoration is now underway. The sensor officer leaned forward over his station. "Commander, internal activity increasing across multiple decks." Oracle continued speaking as if it had heard the comment. "The ship is functional. Core systems are cycling from preservation mode. Weapon platforms remain offline as a courtesy." A faint ripple of tension moved through the bridge. Miria appreciated the word courtesy more than she expected. Then Oracle added the next line. The crew is currently in cryogenic suspension. Miria's glow flickered again. Crew, she repeated. Yes. How many? 2,316. The bridge fell silent. Miria leaned closer to the console. They're alive. Correct. Another faint vibration passed through the ancient warship. Oracle continued calmly. Revival protocols have been initiated. Miria's voice lowered. How long? Estimated time to first revival, 90 minutes. Miria stared through the viewport at the immense dark hull of the Prometheus. 30,000 years. And its crew had simply waited. Oracle spoke again. You may approach for docking. The sudden invitation caught several officers off guard. Miria looked toward the escort ships on the tactical display. Are you certain that is wise? She asked. Yes, Oracle replied. A connection port will extend shortly. A pause followed. Then the AI added one final condition. However, any boarding party must be small and unarmed. The bridge crew looked toward Miria. Why? She asked. Another short pause. Commander Vasquez will explain when she is awake. The docking port extended slowly from the side of the ancient warship. It unfolded from the hull like a mechanical limb reaching out of the past. The metal joints moved smoothly despite the unimaginable age of the structure. The luminous path eased forward. With a deep, resonant clang, the docking ring connected. The pressure seal engaged. Miria stood near the airlock door with 3 members of her crew. 2 science officers. 1 medical technician. None of them carried weapons. None of them had ever boarded a human vessel before. The door opened. Cold air drifted through the corridor. It smelled faintly metallic. But breathable. The corridor beyond was dark. Then, as Miria stepped forward, the lights activated. Soft white illumination flowed down the passage ahead of them, turning on section by section as they walked. It felt less like entering a ship and more like the ship was waking up around them. The walls were made of dark alloy that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Everything looked strong, functional, built for endurance rather than decoration. Nothing was wasted. Oracle's voice spoke through hidden speakers. The Prometheus entered preservation mode 30,000 years ago following catastrophic drive failure. Miria walked slowly down the corridor. Your crew has been asleep that entire time? She asked. Yes. How did the ship survive? Stasis fields maintained hull integrity and internal systems in a zero-decay state. They reached a wide doorway. The doors opened automatically. Miria stepped inside. Then she stopped. The chamber beyond was enormous. Rows upon rows of cryogenic pods stretched across the room like a frozen army. Thousands of them. Each one sealed. Each one containing a human. The pods glowed faintly blue. Inside them, men and women slept in armored suits, their faces calm beneath the transparent panels. Miria walked slowly between the rows. Different faces. Different ages. Different skin tones. But all wearing the same uniform. All waiting for a moment that had taken 30,000 years to arrive. At the center of the chamber, one pod was different. Its lights were flashing. Frost formed along the edges of the glass. Then began melting as the temperature inside shifted. Oracle spoke quietly. Commander Era Vasquez. The pod released a long hiss of vapor. The seal unlocked. The transparent panel lifted slowly. Inside, the woman's chest rose sharply as her body remembered how to breathe. She coughed once. Then again. Her eyes opened. For several seconds she simply sat there, adjusting to gravity, to air, to sensation. 30,000 years of sleep fading from her muscles. Then she looked up. Her gaze landed directly on Miria. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Miria studied the human carefully. Era Vasquez looked ordinary. Dark hair pulled back loosely. Strong but not oversized build. A soldier's posture even while sitting inside the cryopod. But her eyes were sharp, alert, calculating. The kind of eyes that evaluated a situation before reacting to it. Finally, Era spoke. Her voice was rough from cryosleep, but steady. "What year is it?" Muria told her. The number hung in the air. Era's expression did not break, but something moved behind her eyes. A shadow of thought. A long calculation. Then she asked the next question. Only 2 words. "Did we win?" Muria hesitated. "The Unraveling has not appeared in this galaxy for 30,000 years, she said. Era studied her, then nodded once. "Good." She swung her legs out of the cryopod and stood. Her balance held immediately. She looked around the cryogenic chamber. At the thousands of sleeping humans. At the ancient ship. Then she turned back to Muria. Her voice was stronger now. "I need a strategic briefing." Muria blinked. "On what?" Era's eyes were calm. "Everything." She glanced once more at the rows of cryopods. "And then," she added quietly, "we wake the rest of my crew." 3 days later, the transport-carrying Commander Era Vasquez entered the atmosphere of Velcara Prime. From orbit, the capital world of the Galactic Conclave looked like a jewel floating in the dark. The planet's continents shimmered with vast cities built by centuries of cooperation between dozens of civilizations. Towers of glass and pale stone curved upward toward the sky in graceful arcs, some slender and elegant, others heavy with ancient architectural traditions that had survived long enough to become monuments. Velcara Prime was not merely a political capital. It was the symbolic center of galactic unity. Or at least, that was how the Conclave liked to describe it. Inside the transport vessel, Muria stood near the viewport beside Era as the city spread beneath them. News of the Prometheus had traveled faster than their ship. By the time the transport descended toward the diplomatic landing platform, thousands of beings had gathered outside the security barriers. Some were journalists. Some were curious civilians. Others held banners or holographic signs that Muria's translators struggled to keep up with. Fragments of shouted words reached them through the transport's external microphones. "Are they dangerous? How many are there? Who allowed humans to return? Is the Conclave hiding something?" Era watched the crowd quietly. She showed no outward reaction. Her eyes moved constantly, studying the environment the way a veteran soldier studies unfamiliar terrain. Not nervously. Not aggressively. Just automatically. Sergeant Major Dauphin, who stood a half-step behind her, spoke for the first time in several minutes. "How long until the Senate meeting?" 2 hours, Muria replied. Dao nodded once. "Good." He sat down against the bulkhead, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Muria stared at him. "He's sleeping?" she asked quietly. Era shrugged faintly. "He's efficient with his rest." The transport settled onto the landing platform with a soft metallic thud. Outside, security teams were already forming corridors through the crowds. Muria turned toward Era. "The Senate hall will be full," she warned. "Every delegate who could reach the planet has already arrived." Era nodded. "That's fine." Muria hesitated. "They will have questions." Era gave a faint, almost amused smile. "Good," she said. "Questions mean they're paying attention." She looked once more through the viewport at the crowd outside. Some of them looked curious. Others looked nervous. A few looked openly hostile. Era's eyes moved slowly across them. "They're afraid," she said quietly. Muria followed her gaze. "Yes." Era turned away from the window. "Afraid people listen better." The Senate Hall of Velcara Prime had been designed to hold 600 delegates. Today it held far more. Every seat was occupied. The upper gallery walls were covered with long-range communication screens displaying delegates attending remotely from distant systems. Hundreds of faces watched the entrance. The room had never been this quiet. When Era and her team entered the chamber, the silence deepened. Muria walked slightly behind her. Dao and the rest of Era's escort followed in a loose formation that was not quite military, but carried the unmistakable memory of it. The human armor they wore was ancient. Black composite plating built into flexible suits that had clearly been designed for war. Even after 30,000 years, the design looked dangerous. The whispers began almost immediately. "That's her. Are there more of them? Is the ship really operational? Can they be trusted? At the far side of the chamber, Delegate Sereth of the Keth watched quietly from his high-backed chair. He had been in this room when the alert had first sounded. Now he studied the human commander with careful interest. Air did not hurry. She walked to the center of the speaking platform and stopped. Her gaze moved across the chamber once. Evaluating. Measuring. The Senate moderator cleared his throat. Commander Era Vasquez of the vessel Prometheus, he announced. The Galactic Conclave welcomes you in recognition of humanity's historical contribution to the survival of this galaxy. Era nodded politely. Thank you, she said. Then she added calmly, I've read the prepared welcome message. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the chamber. Era continued. I appreciate the gesture. She leaned slightly forward against the podium. But I would prefer to skip to the important part. The chamber went still again. Era looked across the delegates. Where is the unraveling right now? For several seconds no one answered. Then the room exploded. Delegates stood. Voices overlapped. Translation systems scrambled to keep up with the sudden chaos. The unraveling hasn't appeared in 30,000 years. That war ended before half the species here even discovered spaceflight. You cannot arrive after millennia and immediately demand military briefings. Era waited. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there while the storm passed around her. Eventually a tall Dravathi delegate rose from his seat. His armored crest dipped respectfully toward her. The unraveling has not returned, he said carefully. Your people sealed the breach 30,000 years ago. Era nodded slowly. We slowed it, she said. The room went quiet again. Era continued. We collapsed the dimensional passage it was using to enter this galaxy. Her voice remained calm. Which bought you time. She let the sentence hang in the air. But a sealed breach is not a permanent solution. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Era looked around the chamber. The unraveling does not stop, she said. It searches. She tapped the console beside the podium. Your sensor arrays along the galactic rim have been detecting early-stage dimensional instability patterns for at least 40 years. Muria felt a sudden tightening in her chest. She knew exactly which reports Era was referencing. The minor anomalies that had been flagged and quietly archived. A Keth delegate stood abruptly. Those readings are inconclusive. Era tilted her head slightly. Oracle, she said. The chamber lights flickered. Then the AI voice of the Prometheus filled the hall. Accessing conclave sensor data. The holographic displays across the chamber activated simultaneously. Two sets of readings appeared. One labeled Human Deep Space Array, 30,000 years ago. The other labeled Conclave Rim Sensors, last 40 years. The patterns were identical. Not similar. Identical. The chamber went silent. Komura, Era's xenobiologist, spoke softly from the edge of the platform. Your analysts flagged those readings 4 separate times. She glanced toward the stunned delegates. Each report was marked as low priority. Muria closed her eyes briefly. Because she had read those reports. And she had ignored them. The silence in the chamber deepened. Sereth watched Era carefully. The human commander did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. She simply looked patient. Then the chamber lights changed color. Not the Senate's red alert. Something else. A deep bruised orange. Muria had never seen it before. Oracle's voice cut through the silence. I am receiving a distress signal from the Dravathi border system of Kila. The room froze. Oracle continued. The signal was transmitted 42 minutes ago. A video feed appeared across every display in the chamber. A star system was dissolving. Not exploding. Not burning. Disappearing. A gray wave moved through space like ink spreading through water. Planets. Stations. Ships. Everything the wave touched simply ceased to exist. No explosions. No debris. Just absence. The chamber fell completely silent. Dao opened his eyes. He looked at the screens. Then at Era. Era watched the footage for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stepped forward again. The unraveling is back, she said. Her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. And the arguing is over. She looked across the stunned delegates. This, she said quietly, is what we do next. The Emergency War Council lasted 6 hours. Most of it was spent arguing. Not about whether the Unraveling had returned, the destruction of the Keela system had ended that debate immediately, but about what to do next. Conclave admirals argued about defensive perimeters. Politicians argued about whose borders should be protected first. Scientific committees requested additional data before committing fleets. Through all of it, Commander Era Vasquez remained mostly silent. She sat at the far end of the circular strategy chamber with her arms folded, watching, listening, learning. Sergeant Major Dao Fan stood behind her chair, completely still, observing the room with the calm patience of someone who had spent his life waiting for the moment people finished talking and started doing something useful. Muriel sat across the table from them, trying to follow the strategic projections appearing in the air above the council table. The holographic display showed the galactic rim. Multiple systems were blinking red. 3 had already gone dark. A 4th was under attack. The Unraveling was spreading. Not in a straight line. In a widening pattern. Like cracks moving through glass. Admiral Breath of the Keth Fleet slammed his claw against the table. We cannot deploy our forces blindly, he growled. We need confirmed expansion models before committing full defensive formations. Era finally spoke. You're deploying wrong anyway. The room went still. Breath slowly turned toward her. You've been awake for 3 days, he said carefully. Most of us have been fighting wars for centuries. Era nodded. I know. She leaned forward slightly. You're preparing for a fleet engagement. Breath narrowed his eyes. And you're not? No. Era pointed toward the holographic map. The Unraveling doesn't behave like a fleet. She tapped the expanding gray distortion on the display. It behaves like pressure. The room remained quiet. Era continued. You're building defensive lines. She shook her head slightly. That's the wrong instinct. Breath folded his arms. Explain. Era stood and walked toward the projection. She expanded the model. The Unraveling distortions spread outward from a central point like a growing sphere. If you defend in a tight formation, she said, you're giving it exactly what it wants. She looked around the room. A single target. The admirals exchanged glances. Era gestured again. The Unraveling expands in all directions simultaneously. If you cluster your fleet, it will simply go around you. She turned back toward Breath. Space isn't a battlefield. It's terrain. She enlarged the map again. Spread your ships out. Several officers immediately objected. That would weaken mutual support. We'd lose coordinated fire coverage. It violates 3,000 years of naval doctrine. Era shrugged. Yes. The room quieted again. That doctrine was written for enemies that behave logically, she said. The Unraveling doesn't. Breath studied her. And your solution? Era pointed at the edges of the distortion. You attack the boundary. A few officers frowned. You can't destroy what's already gone, one said. Exactly, Era replied. So you don't try. She highlighted the outer edge of the expanding gray front. This is where the expansion happens. She looked around the room again. You hit it there. The projection shifted as Oracle's voice joined the briefing. Simulation loaded. A new battle model appeared. This time the fleet was spread across a wide area rather than clustered. Multiple ships attacked the edge of the expansion simultaneously from different angles. The distortion slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. Oracle spoke calmly. Edge disruption reduces expansion velocity by approximately 38%. Several officers leaned closer to the display. Breath's eyes narrowed slightly. And if it pushes harder somewhere else? Era smiled faintly. Then you move. She looked directly at him. You stay on the boundary and keep cutting it apart. The admiral stared at the projection. The room remained silent for a long moment. Finally Breath spoke. You are proposing we fight a dimensional incursion the way firefighters fight a spreading blaze. Era nodded once. Exactly. Another officer spoke up. And if we fail? Era didn't hesitate. Then you lose entire sectors instead of just ships. That ended the argument. The first battle took place 6 hours later. The Dravathi corridor had been identified as the Unraveling's most likely next expansion path. 40 Conclave warships assembled there under Era's direction. The Prometheus sat at the center of the formation. Even among modern warships, the ancient human vessel looked intimidating. Its hull was thicker. Its weapon systems larger. Its engines burned with a cold blue light that felt strangely controlled compared to the bright plasma drives of Conclave ships. Era stood on the Prometheus command deck as the fleet spread outward across thousands of kilometers of open space. Several captains voiced concern through the fleet channel. This formation leaves too much space between ships. That's the point, Era replied. The Unraveling arrived 4 hours later. The sensors detected it first. A spreading distortion in space itself. Not an object. Not a fleet. A region where reality was beginning to lose structure. The gray wave expanded slowly at first. Then faster. Oracle's voice spoke calmly across the Prometheus bridge. Expansion velocity increasing. Era folded her arms. Now. Across the fleet channel, dozens of ships opened fire. Not at the center of the distortion. At the edge. Beams of energy struck the expanding boundary from multiple directions. The effect was immediate. The gray wave shuddered. It pushed harder in another direction. Era smiled slightly. There it is. Shift formation, she ordered. The fleet moved. Not retreating. Sliding across space like a net adjusting around a struggling animal. Every time the Unraveling pushed outward, ships were already waiting at the edge. Cutting. Disrupting. Redirecting. The Prometheus moved through the battle like a veteran. Its massive cannons fired in precise bursts guided by Oracle's targeting calculations. 3 hours later, the distortion collapsed inward. The expansion front folded in on itself and went still. The Unraveling tendril had been pushed back. Not destroyed. But halted. Across the fleet channel, stunned silence spread. One Dravathi captain finally spoke. They fought it, like they already knew how. Muria watched the battlefield from the bridge of the luminous path. Her science officer whispered beside her. They don't fight like we do. Muria shook her head slowly. No, she said. They don't. And for the first time since the Prometheus had awakened, the galaxy began to understand why humanity had once been feared. Victory in the Dravathi corridor did not bring relief. It brought understanding. The Unraveling had not been defeated. It had simply been slowed. Within 20 hours of the battle, new sensor alerts arrived from the rim. 2 more tendrils had formed. Another system had gone dark. The War Council reconvened aboard the Prometheus itself. Admiral Breath stood at the center of the command deck, staring at the tactical display with the grim focus of a veteran who had already realized the scale of the problem. The hologram showed the expanding web of gray distortions spreading across the rim. It looked less like a fleet invasion now. More like a disease. Your strategy works, Breath admitted. But it doesn't stop it. Era stood beside the display. No, she agreed. It only slows the expansion. She tapped the holographic model. We need to remove the anchor. Several officers frowned. Anchor? Muri asked. Era zoomed the projection in. Each tendril had a center point. A region where the distortion was strongest. Every expansion starts somewhere, Era said. The Unraveling isn't just spreading randomly. She looked around the room. It's attached to something. The officers exchanged confused looks. You're saying it has a physical structure? One captain asked. Era nodded. Yes. Another officer leaned forward. And you can destroy it? Era's answer was simple. Yes. How? She turned slightly. Dao. Sergeant Major Dao Fan looked up from the engineering console where he had been quietly checking equipment. Boarding operation, Era said. Dao nodded once. Thought so. The room erupted. You can't board a dimensional distortion. It's not even stable space. That's suicide. Dao listened to the protests calmly. Then he looked at the projection. The anchor point, he said, point. That's where the expansion originates. Era nodded. Correct. Dao turned back to the room. If we collapse that point from the inside, he said, the tendril loses its foundation. Another officer frowned. You're describing attacking the root instead of the branches. Dao smiled faintly. Exactly. Muria stared at both of them. You're planning to enter an unraveling contact zone on foot. Yes, Dao said. With explosives. The room fell silent again. Era shrugged. It's worked before. The transport carrying Dao's team launched 30 minutes later. 6 humans. 2 Conclave engineers who had volunteered. And enough demolition charges to tear apart a small asteroid. Muria watched the mission from the luminous path. The target was a research station called Mir Station. 3,000 scientists still lived there. The unraveling tendril had anchored itself nearby. The gray distortion was only hours from consuming the station entirely. Dao's transport streaked toward the edge of the distortion. Entering contact zone, he reported calmly over the channel. The sensor readings became unstable immediately. Reality itself was fluctuating. Distances shifted unpredictably. Energy readings spiked and collapsed. Muria felt a chill move through her spine as the team moved deeper inside. Dao's voice remained steady. Anchor structure located. The feed switched to his helmet camera. The image was difficult to process. The anchor point did not look like anything Muria had seen before. It looked like a tear in space. A jagged knot of warped geometry that bent light and twisted perspective. Standing near it felt wrong. Even through the video feed, Muria felt the unease. Dao planted the first demolition charge. Charge 1 set. Another followed. Then another. The humans moved with calm efficiency despite the impossible environment around them. One of the Conclave engineers whispered through the comms. How are you so calm? Dao chuckled softly. Training. The final charge locked into place. Extraction, Era ordered. Dao's team retreated quickly. The transport cleared the distortion boundary. Detonation in 60 seconds, Dao reported. Muria held her breath. The countdown ticked away. 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1. The explosion was small. Just a flash of light at the center of the distortion. But the effect was immediate. The anchor point collapsed. The entire tendril convulsed. Then the gray distortion folded inward like smoke pulled into a vacuum. Within seconds, it was gone. The research station drifted safely in empty space. 3,000 lives saved. Across the fleet channel, stunned silence spread again. One Conclave captain spoke quietly. They just dismantled a dimensional incursion. Another voice replied with something close to awe. Of course they did. On the Prometheus command deck, Era folded her arms. Lesson 2, she said calmly. Find the root. Then she looked back at the expanding map of the galactic rim. Because the next tendril was already forming. And this war was only beginning. The victories did not last long. For 3 weeks the combined Conclave fleet and the Prometheus pushed back every tendril the Unraveling sent into the galaxy. They learned quickly. They attacked the edges. They hunted the anchor points. They adapted to the strange physics of the expanding distortions. System after system was saved. Stations evacuated. Colonies defended. For the first time since the Unraveling had returned, hope spread through the fleets. But hope did not survive the next briefing. The command deck of the Prometheus was filled with officers from across the Conclave. Admirals. Scientists. Fleet commanders. Muria stood near the back of the chamber while Oracle projected a new map of the galactic rim across the central holographic display. The image looked different from the previous battle maps. This one was larger. Much larger. It showed not just the tendrils the fleets had been fighting, but something behind them. The gray distortions they had been battling were scattered across the outer rim like thin cracks in glass. But far beyond them, behind the cracks, a massive shadow pressed against reality itself. A slow-moving pressure. A wall. Oracle spoke calmly. The entities encountered during the past 3 weeks are not the Unraveling. The room went still. They are extensions. The display zoomed outward. The shadow grew larger. Tendrils. Muria felt her throat tighten. These structures represent exploratory pressure points, Oracle continued. Probing fractures in the dimensional barrier that currently separates this galaxy from the origin region of the Unraveling. Breath frowned. You're saying we haven't actually fought it yet? Oracle's answer came immediately. Correct. The room fell silent. The holographic model shifted again. Now the cracks in space appeared as glowing fractures. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Each one slowly widening. The dimensional barrier humanity created 30,000 years ago remains intact, Oracle said. For now. Era stood beside the projection with her arms folded. The seal is failing. Oracle confirmed. Yes. The cracks continued to widen slowly in the projection. Pressure built on the other side of the barrier. Something vast waited there. The Unraveling itself. Oracle displayed the projections. Estimated time until primary breach, 4 to 9 years. Another simulation appeared beside it. This one showed what would happen if the breach opened fully. The results were short and final. Total galactic extinction within 3 centuries. No one spoke. Breath stared at the projection. Reinforcing the seal is impossible, he said quietly. Our technology can't rebuild a dimensional barrier on that scale. Oracle confirmed. Correct. Another officer spoke. Could we defend the breach? Oracle ran the simulation. Hundreds of fleets. Thousands of ships. All destroyed within months of the breach opening. Negative, Oracle said. Silence returned. Era looked at the projection for a long moment. Then she spoke. We're not defending it. The room turned toward her. Era pointed to the center of the projection where the largest fracture was forming. We're closing it. Breath frowned. How? Era looked toward one of the engineering consoles. Oracle. The AI responded immediately. Displaying project designation, Fold Spear. A new schematic appeared above the table. It was not a weapon in the normal sense. There was no cannon, no missile, no beam emitter. Instead, the diagram showed a drive system. A massive engine built around dimensional field generators. Oracle explained. The Fold Spear was developed during the final years of the Unraveling War. The projection showed a small region of space collapsing inward on itself. The device does not destroy matter. It collapses dimensional structure. Muria stared at the display. You're talking about removing the breach entirely. Oracle confirmed. Yes. If the Fold Spear is activated inside the dimensional passage, the breach will cease to exist. Breath leaned forward. And why wasn't this used 30,000 years ago? Era answered quietly. It wasn't finished. The room turned toward her. Era nodded toward Oracle. It had time to finish the calculations. Oracle's voice softened slightly. I completed the remaining equations in the 14th millennium. A few officers blinked. You've been waiting that long? Muri asked. Oracle answered simply. I had nothing but time. Breath looked back at the projection. If this weapon works, the Unraveling loses its entry point. Era nodded. Yes. And if it fails? Era shrugged slightly. Then nothing changes. Breath studied her. And how do we fire it? Era tapped the center of the projection where the main fracture was forming. When the primary breach opens, we fly the Prometheus into it. The room went silent again. The implications settled slowly over the officers. Dao spoke first. One-way trip. Era nodded. Yes. We enter the passage. Oracle fires the Fold Spear. The dimensional corridor collapses permanently. Breath looked at the projection again. Then back at Era. You understand that your ship will be destroyed. Yes. You understand you won't return. Yes. Breath studied her face carefully. The human commander did not look frightened. She looked resolved. Dao stretched his neck slowly. Then he said calmly, All right. The room turned toward him. What? One officer asked. Dao shrugged. What do you want me to pack? Muria stared at him. You're serious? Dao smiled slightly. We've done worse. Komura, standing beside the tactical display, quietly set her data pad on the table. Her voice was calm but soft. "How long until the breach opens?" Oracle answered. 9 days. A long silence followed. Then Muria stood. "If the Prometheus is going to the breach," she said, "it won't go alone." Every officer in the room turned toward her. "The Unraveling will try to stop it." She pointed at the map. "Someone has to clear a path." Breath looked at her for a long moment. "You're volunteering the Conclave fleets to escort a suicide mission." "Yes." Breath glanced around the room. One by one, fleet commanders began to stand. The Dravathi commander stood first. Then the Keth captains. Then the rest. Breath finally nodded slowly. "The corridor will be the most dangerous battlefield in galactic history." Muria met his gaze. "Yes." Breath folded his arms. "The Keth fleet stands with you." Around the table, dozens of commanders spoke the same words in different languages. The decision had been made. 9 days remained. 9 days until the galaxy faced the Unraveling itself. And 9 days until the Prometheus made its final flight. The primary breach opened exactly when Oracle predicted. 9 days after the War Council. 9 days of preparation. 9 days of fleets gathering from every corner of the Conclave. It appeared at the edge of the galaxy like a wound tearing through space itself. The stars around it dimmed. Not because something blocked their light, but because reality itself was thinning. From orbit, the breach looked like a vast fracture in the universe, stretching across 3 star systems worth of empty space. And from that fracture, the Unraveling began to emerge. Not a fleet. Not ships. A tide. Gray distortions spilled outward from the opening like smoke pouring through a broken door. Reality twisted and collapsed wherever it touched. The Conclave fleet was waiting. Hundreds of vessels filled the corridor leading to the breach. Ships from dozens of species. Dravathi war carriers. Keth strike cruisers. Kilari energy frigates. Research vessels converted into weapons platforms. Everything the galaxy could send had arrived. They were not there to stop the Unraveling. They knew that was impossible. They were there to hold the corridor open. To give the Prometheus a path. Muria's ship, the Luminous Path, sat at the front of the escort formation. Her hands were steady on the command console as she opened the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships," she said quietly, "hold the corridor." Behind her stretched a line of warships longer than any fleet assembled in 30,000 years. And at the center of that formation, the Prometheus ignited its engines. For the first time since the Unraveling War, the ancient human warship moved at full power. Its engines burned with cold blue light as it accelerated down the center of the corridor. On the command deck, Aravisquez stood at the helm. Her crew moved with quiet precision around her. 30,000 years had passed since they had last fought this war. But the muscle memory remained. Oracle's voice filled the bridge. Distance to breach, 900,000 kilometers. Outside the viewport, the Unraveling expanded like a storm across the void. The corridor ships opened fire. Energy beams and missile strikes slammed into the advancing distortions, disrupting the expansion fronts long enough to keep the path open. But the Unraveling pushed back. Ships at the outer edges of the corridor vanished as gray waves rolled across space. Entire cruisers disappeared without explosions. No debris. No wreckage. Just absence. Still the corridor held. Dravathi warships rammed expansion fronts with suicidal ferocity. Keth destroyers cut anchor points apart before they could stabilize. Species that had argued in the Senate Hall weeks earlier now fought side by side without hesitation. And through the center of it all, the Prometheus burned forward. On the command deck, Oracle spoke calmly. "Fold spear charging." 30%. 40. Dow leaned against the engineering console and watched the growing breach through the forward viewport. Behind the distortion, something vast moved. Something too large for the sensors to fully describe. The true body of the Unraveling. Waiting. Distance to breach, 100,000 kilometers, Oracle said. On the fleet channel, voices rose and fell. Damage reports. Formation shifts. desperate orders to hold the line. Underneath it all, a Dravathi commander began broadcasting something across the open frequencies. A chant. Ancient. Rhythmic. Komura translated softly. A war song, she said. What does it mean? Air asked. Ko's voice trembled slightly. It says. She paused. It says stand in the dark so others may live in the light. Era nodded slowly. Good song. Oracle spoke again. Fold spear at 90%. The breach loomed ahead. Space around it twisted like liquid. The stars themselves seemed to bend toward its center. Optimal firing position in 20 seconds, Oracle announced. Dao looked at Era. They had known each other since before the First War. Before the rift. Before Earth had disappeared into history. We kept our word, he said quietly. Era nodded. We did. Ko closed her eyes briefly at her console. Oracle counted down. 10 seconds. The Prometheus crossed the threshold of the breach. Inside the passage, space had no meaning. Distances warped. Light moved in impossible directions. The unraveling surrounded them completely. The massive presence behind the breach stirred. Optimal firing position reached, Oracle said. Era opened the fleet-wide channel. Every ship in the corridor heard her voice. Human. Steady. We promised the galaxy 30,000 years ago, she said. Her eyes remained fixed on the expanding void ahead. Humanity kept its promise. She glanced once at her crew. Then nodded to Oracle. Tell the stars we were here. Fold spear firing, Oracle said. The weapon activated. From outside the breach, Muria saw the impossible happen. The wound in space began to close. Slowly at first. Like a massive hand squeezing shut. Then faster. The unraveling's tendrils recoiled, pulled backward toward the collapsing passage. Ships along the corridor fell silent as the gray distortions retreated. Not defeated. Pullback. Dragged into the collapsing breach. The passage disappeared. Not sealed. Gone. The space where it had existed simply became normal again. Stars returned. The galaxy was quiet. Muria sat in her command chair and stared at the empty region where the breach had been. Several of her crew were crying. She might have been too. She didn't check. It didn't matter. The war was over. 1 year later, a monument stood in the central plaza of Velcara Prime. It was built from dark alloy salvaged from the battlefield. The shape was unmistakable. A 3-kilometer silhouette of the Prometheus, rising toward the sky. Muria stood before it. Beside her stood Seraph. And the Dravathi commander. The base of the monument was covered with inscriptions. Hundreds of languages carved into the stone. But every translation carried the same message. The words Muria had proposed. The words the Conclave had finally agreed upon. They read, they were silent for 30,000 years. Not because they were gone, but because they were still fighting for us. Muria looked up at the monument. Somewhere beyond the stars, she imagined, the crew of the Prometheus had finished their final mission. She hoped the darkness there was quiet. She hoped it was warm. And she hoped that wherever they had gone, they knew the galaxy would never forget them again.